let's assume that we had published in 1990, immediately after the fall of communism, all the files in the political police archive. Would this have been what we call lustration?
I think it would have been better. I cannot say now what effects it would have had, but it would have been a better situation, because I am for truth more than for lying, even if it's bad for the person. I'm sure that a lot of people wouldn't be in the politics in Hungary now, or not so effective, because there are many people still involved in politics who were involved in that system. I don't speak only about the agents. I speak also about the officers. Even in the present government, there are many people who were officers in that time. So part of this mechanism is oppressive mechanism. And this is not good for Hungary. So I don't know if this would have been lustration, because there are many doubts about the veracity. There are many doubts about the context. And not every case is the same, as we like to imagine sometimes that everybody who was in it is a bad person. It's also not true, but it would have been much better. And I envy the Germans, because there the West Germans could force their openness on the East Germans. The East Germans have not been happier for that. We know that they are very dissatisfied for many other reasons, economical, etc. But still, the thing happened, and you can be sure if you go into such an institute, the archive, you will get what is there. In Hungary, you cannot be sure anymore, because a lot of things were destroyed, not only before the change, but after the change. A lot of things are hidden still. So there is this uncertainty, which is very good for people who love uncertainty and love power.
Like in Romania, this book about your mother is written on two levels. The main story on the upper side of the page is almost always complemented on by footnotes with pieces from secret police's files. In my view, the layout of the book is very meaningful, suggesting the life that many have lived in that era, as if secret police agents or informers were literally hiding in their basement. What role the fear has played, this fear?
Whose fear? Sorry. The fear of who?
Yes, the fear of police, of
police agents, secret service. Yes, we all thought that we are surrounded by agents, informers, so to speak. And then one was careful, but also I remember very well, try to be careful. I remember very well when we spoke on the phone in the 70s with anybody, a friend, we always joked about it. Major, are you listening, Major? Or if somebody was listening to it. So in Hungary, it was not, it was a dictatorship, but not so strict as in many other Eastern countries. There was a little space for jokes there. Okay, they threw out people from their jobs, or there were some restrictive measures, but in fact, it was, we were not so existentially afraid of this system of information, and especially the 70s and the 80s. These last years, the last 15 years of this socialist experiment, it was every day it was more free. You felt that they lost control. Of course, if you read the acts, if you read the dossiers, there are, still there are these reportages and reports, and everybody is still observing everybody. But you felt that it's not so dangerous. And I could go in 1983, 82, 83, I went to West Berlin, which was for 7 months, which was then, a lot of people could go because the Kada regime had an arrangement with the West Germans and the East Germans that any Hungarian can go to West Berlin for 1 month without a visa, and the East Germans allow us if they don't ask for a West German visa. So whose is West Berlin? That was the dispute. But still, you could go there, and a lot of friends went there. And I was invited there as a in a theater to work in a theater, and all I had to arrange, because after 1 month you did need a Western visa. Sorry for these details, but somehow I got around it with the help of friends there. And then the West Germans were very severe, but still you could go there and go to other Western countries. And also you could have you could talk with your friends freely about many things. Even if you said, okay, somebody will report it, but it will not have very dangerous consequences. After 83, I was freelance, so they couldn't throw me out of a job. They could maybe stop getting, but I got a lot of little works, little things I put together my money. In Hungary, it was allowed somehow to get rid of this political system of that you have to work, you have to be there every day. So what I mean with this, that yes, there was this feeling that you are observed. Yes, there was this feeling, but it was more folkloric. And now for us, it wasn't existential threat in a way. We knew the stories. We helped, for example, in 81 or 83, I helped the Solidarność Polish children, children of people who were imprisoned in Poland, came to Hungary for recreation, little children. And I invited 2 or 3, everybody, friends invited the children, otherwise they couldn't have come. And nobody understood. I went into this agency and said, I want to invite this person. And the official couldn't say anything about it. Why? She didn't understand it, but she couldn't stop me. And so the little group of Polish children came, whose parents were either in prison or thrown out from their job, came to Hungary for 2 weeks or a month and had a camp there, which was a wonderful thing. So these things happened also. But of course, we knew that we are not free in the original sense of the word. And we knew that many people, not only secretly, but openly, in the communist newspapers were defamating a lot of things that were important for us. So this whole thing was mixed, and it wasn't so simplified, black and white.
You know,
this is what I want to tell you.
Yeah. In Hungary, also in Romania, as in most ex-communist countries, we had access, after a while, of course, to the files of some of the collaborators of this political police. These files were eventually published, and they become like the official story, you know. By doing that, didn't we practically legitimize the narrative that the former political police has created?
In many ways, yes. Because their interpretation, those people who they chose now to be exposed, were exposed. It's true. But, and yes, partial truth is partly not truth, but it's also partly truth. Yeah. So I'm not satisfied with this, but it's still much better. We must admit it's much better than it was before. So it's not the truth, it's not the full truth. It's bad, but we never know the full truth. Anyhow, I don't want to relativize. I don't want to relativize this. The question is very good, and I'm sure that many who are still in power or had connection to that system, because it's 30 years, so they are old people mostly, profited from these half-truths, and many agents or those who were more involved with the government also profited from it, because they were not exposed, so they could have good positions. And morally, it's very bad for a country, because then people can be blackmailed. Those who he's not exposed, but he knows that, and they know about him, and they did blackmail many people or helped in many ways. So it's a kind of a morass, so to speak, you know, muddy morass. How you know what it means? This deep mud. We are in it still. That's true. I don't want to say, but still, okay. I wrote my book. I got. I was lucky with the information because it was not officially conveyed to me. A friend found it, and so when I asked for it officially, I didn't get anything.
Yeah.
So I was lucky, and I could write the book, and it was published, and a lot of people read it. So it's a little part, and I'm not alone in this in Hungary. But the consciousness, the global consciousness about this whole thing is very simplified and very primitive.
Yeah. Yes.
Maybe it's always so. So I was thinking about ancient history, Antonius and Cleopatra. What we know about Antonius and Cleopatra was partly created by Augustus, the guy who killed them, just to make them look stupid and whatever. And we don't know the real truth of the full truth of it, but it's still a very strong story. So I mean, a lot of people would think very primitively about them. But if you as an intellectual, an elite guy who can do the researches, you can get very close to the truthful thing. And that's something which I appreciate. So
about your book, you have discovered that your mother was a spy working for communist regime. And you decided to write a book about that. Is this a gesture of healing, of personal catharsis, for example? Was it because you didn't want to let your mother's story be told only from political police files? Or maybe on the contrary, you wanted, maybe not from the beginning, a process of personal healing?
Very, very good question. What I just want to, the beginning you said they were spies. They didn't know that they are spies. In fact, the other thing, they served the communist regime. They were communists. So even without being an agent, they were convinced, because they were convinced communists. So of course they served the communist regime. That was for them very evident. That was not a problem for them. So just the modulation of the question. It is, for me, it was a kind of catharsis and healing. Not for everybody. My sister hated me for this book, one of my sisters. And it's very uncomfortable. And some people, I spoke with some friends who were writer friends afterwards. And they said, well, maybe, how can you get into the archive? So 20 years passed and they still didn't get to the archive. Okay, how can you get to the archive 15 years after the change? When my book was published, it was 15 years. And I said, it's very simple. You just have to do this and this and this. And then I asked them, and if you would learn about your mother, would you write a book about her? Silence. So it's not evident, even they are with the same ideals, the same convictions, the same side, the same so-called liberal intellectuals, because it's very, very difficult to write about your mother in this way. The thing is, what I was lucky in the situation that I got to learn it still when my writing powers were strong enough and I was not afraid to tell the truth. But also because today in the literature, the world literature, the so-called auto-fiction, when you mix novelistic style approach with facts, is, let's say, very fashionable, but it's not simply fashionable, but it's a big wave of literature which is coming now after so many years of fiction, when you transformed your life into other figures, and now the novel today is in very many cases, very recognizable portrait of the family of the writer or his own life in France, in Germany, in the States, in the English-speaking world. Why? It's a very interesting question, why this genre has become so influential. But I am lucky that at this moment, my book was written during this period because it helped me very much to be very free in creating novelistic fictional things, mixing it with facts. I don't know, if 30 years ago, maybe I wouldn't be so courageous to mix facts and fiction in this way.
Mm-hmm.
But I was totally free because this genre is I like it very much. I'm a big fan of biographies of
Mm-hmm.
writers. When I read a writer, I always read his biography also, or try to get it. Not one biography, 10 biographies. Mm-hmm. My favorites like Flaubert or Kleist or Kafka. I love the facts of life. There are some people, for a writer, to Dostoevsky. I just read about a book yesterday of Dostoevsky. I'm very curious to get in touch with it. How he wrote Crime and Punishment. Mm-hmm. How he created it from his life. Mm-hmm. There are some people who say, no, the biography is not important to understand and enjoy a literary work. Mm-hmm. But it has changed totally now that the genre of autofiction, which is combining the facts of one's life, recognizable. There are very, very good French writers who do this, Annie Ernaux and Carrère, who are, I mean, they are world champions in this, not simply good writers. Mm-hmm. So the context of my book in a literary sense has changed. So when my agent and friend, my publisher, went to London, the book fair, where the success was based on the international success, for them, the publishers in Denmark, in Sweden, in France, in Italy, it was not a problem that what is this book? What is this book? What is the genre of this book? And they read it not as a scandalous thing or an interesting, but as literature. And I know it because I spoke with them. My agent said that they have to call me to talk with me if they want to buy my book. And most of them did, not all of them, but the big ones, yes. And it was clear that for them it was literature. So it helped me very much that it was not a political sidekick, a journalistic whatever, but pure literature with the facts of life. Now, catharsis. It was like a very, very good question. You formulated it wonderfully. It was like, I realized it only later when I was sitting at my table and writing this book with all the papers around me, the family papers and everything. I was like a concrete block. My body was frozen because I had to do something. I just didn't know how to do it. You know, I had this. And it was a process of 7-8 months, the first version of the book, because later the Romanian version already has 100 pages more.
Yeah.
When the international interest was growing, I decided to write 2 more chapters. One I wrote in English, and that was part of the London chapter was written in English originally. So they could get it because people were very much interested, the agents for book publishers. And I was sitting at my table and frozen, and it was like a reverse giving birth to my mother. It was like a birth, you know. I had now a little son who is 5 years old, my first son, quite late. And I was there at the birth. And the mother told me later that I was pushing more hard than she was. She was laughing at me because I was there and I was pushing because they told her to push. And this was the feeling. This was the feeling that I'm pushing this story and giving birth to my mother, that she must survive this story intact, or as possible, as intact as possible, you know. And it's bloody and it's difficult and everybody's crying and it's not easy. This was the process. You can call this catharsis. But you know, the other part is also that it's never ending, because you still get some papers, still, by chance, about my father, because the dossiers of my father were lost, and you still get them. Half a year ago, I heard about new things, but because of the pandemics, I couldn't go in the archive. But I will go in when I will feel safe to see the new papers of my father. So it's a never-ending story. Also, if your friends say that maybe he would write it, maybe he wouldn't write it, it means an ambivalence. You know, I would never think about it twice that I have to write it. it's true that if my brother doesn't say that he wants to make a big exposition about it, it would be slower. I'm a slow person, in fact. I carry projects for years. So it helped me because he said, I will have my exposition in November or October. So I said, okay, then I have to finish the book in October. And it helped me a lot.
Yeah. You had a deadline.
I had a terrible deadline because, you know, it's partly it's a never ending, and it's so difficult to not to save my parents, but to put them in the right context.
Yes.
You know, when my book was published and it had big news coverage in Hungary, and a lot of people learned my name then, and people who knew me already said, oh, well, you did something. And then I went in a cafe, and the guy said to me, one of these people in my orbit said, you have a lot to thank to your mother. So he wanted to imply that it's helped you as a writer. And I just want to tell you, partly it's true. It's true. But okay, do it. Do it you too.
Yeah.
Write about your mother, a book which will be interesting enough. Because the thing is that the press of my book abroad was much better than the press of my book in Hungary. It was good in Hungary. They didn't say it's a bad book, but they didn't go as deep. As an Italian journalist who read my book, and in Corriere della Sera, she wrote as if she would sit in my head. In Hungary, they were, yeah, well, yes. You know, the history, when you feel that an Italian or a German journalist, not all of them liked it, but some liked it in the best way possible because they understood it abroad. And when my book was published, people said, and they heard the news that it was bought by 15 publishers abroad. Why? How would they understand this Hungarian, particular Hungarian story? What's interesting for them abroad? That was also part of putting it down, you know. And you know, they understood it much better. So the part of the healing and the catharsis means that I was lucky that I got to learn it when I had the capacity to write about it. I am lucky that my brother pushed me, and the circumstances also pushed me, because otherwise it would have been slower and more dangerous. And I'm lucky also that the Germans, the Romanians, the Italians understand it as literature. Okay, we are talking because it's an interesting subject, and the subject is interesting, of politically, but the book is written as a novel. And so I learned a lot about, this is what I call the autofiction. That's genre which is in the last 30 years is simply unavoidable. But Simone de Beauvoir wrote autofiction also, you know, she wrote The Mandarins, and I don't know. So it's in France especially, it was a very fashionable always to create from reality a kind of novelistic thinking, mixing facts and fiction. So I did learn incredibly about myself as a writer, because I had an impossible task. How can you write about this? And I was just sitting now, because I'm going to Timișoara, as you know, and they asked me what part I would read of the book, which we shall have a short reading, Romanian, Hungarian.
Yeah, I know.
5 pages, all right. And I decided that it will be the first text, which is usually, okay, the birthday, the first 5 pages of the birthday. And why? Because sometimes there is 2 other parts which I used to read. The end, the last chapter, it's the beginning of the last chapter, which is very philosophical and melancholical. And this one where I found the style to write about Mrs. Papai, my mother, to discover my mother as a new person. And this style is ironic, a little bit feuilleton style, you know, in the newspapers, there is this feuilleton prose, very light. And when I found this, it was not evident for me in the beginning if I will find this style or not. it went like this, you know, because I could be very light, speaking about a very heavy subject with on a light tone and ironical tone, and still showing my love for this person, my utter infinite love for her. And that's what's important for me. And that's the why I tell you this, that finding the style was also a catharsis.
Yeah.
How
finding the right style
for a writer. Yes, it's a catharsis. This is it. Fantastic. Because I'm learning. I'm learning all the time. As even now I'm working on new things and I'm learning. How can you do it? It's not evident. You don't sit down like somebody who's writing a series of crime series, which are quite good, okay, but he knows how it will be, like he cooks it like a good soup. But for me, every occasion is finding the words, the style, the music for it. So in this way, it is also the last thing, and I will finish now, is that in Hungary, but also in Romania, the vocabulary of talking about this subject is so primitive.
Yes.
That I put the task there to enrich, to make this vocabulary richer, more human, more expressive. Because it's the negativity of the subject and the scandalousness of the subject make it very difficult to talk about subtle things, subtly. Like where in human contexts, we are subtle beings, you know, especially with your mother or your family. It's a very dangerous to tear it up and show. And I wanted to show how the system worked through the families. There are some good books about it, scientific books about it, but scientific books about it for me are so boring, even if they are very good and useful. They miss exactly this point.
The human being.
How it happens in the family, how it happens with a creature who is very important to you, not simply somebody.
Yeah, you mentioned Germany. You know, I know that in post-Nazi Germany, there was a tradition, even in literature. We heard about children confronting their parents and asking questions like, "Father, why did you become a Nazi?" There was not such confrontation in the ex-communist spaces. You, Peter Esterhazy, but not immediately after the fall of the communists. I have two questions here. The first one, of course, why didn't we have in the 90s such a child-parent dialogue? Was it related to the way that political policy has penetrated and infested all the society? And my second question, if only you had found out the truth about your mother while she was still alive, would you talk to her about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No way out. And I think it would have been a very good conversation. Maybe not in the beginning, slowly, because the love was true between us. So it's an open relationship. The appreciation for the other person, even if we could be critical. The other question is more complicated because, you know, after 45, after the war, after the bestiality, after the Holocaust, the crimes against humanity were very great. In socialist Hungary, I don't speak now about Romania, the Ceausescu regime, which was also very criminal. And the Hungarian was also, it was more lukewarm, not so
strong.
Not so oppositional, not so as I told you before, we could joke about it. We could joke about it. We lived in it and we joked about it. And we didn't know when it will end. And what's important here is that, yes, a lot of people wanted, and of course, especially from the right side, who were really, from the 40s, after the war, they were really brutally oppressed and killed and put into camps, the politically right, the political right, the radical right, the people in 56 who fought against the Soviets. But now the Soviets went out, yes, the Soviet army, the occupants went out, so who could you fight with? And in very, very fast, in the first 2 or 3 years, it became clear that even the rightist, centrist, rightist government is employing communists. They are employing communists. It's not in their interest to criticize them or put them in jail. But you know, Adenauer, after the war, the German Chancellor, Adenauer, used a lot of Nazi judges to build up the system, used a lot of Nazi officers to build up the system, who said, no, I'm not Nazi anymore. Okay, you have this position. Because otherwise he couldn't have built up a state. I'm not glad about it, but so it happened the same thing here in the 90s. It wasn't that so sharp, it wasn't so confrontational. Of course, verbally, yes, verbally, everybody said the informers, it's the worst thing you can say about anybody, that he's an informer. But otherwise, there wasn't this mass feeling. Yes, the liberals, who are now totally destroyed party, for whom I voted also in 90s, the so-called Free Democratic Party, had a program, what you say, lustration and the cleaning of the system. They always failed about it because reality was stronger. So everybody on the left from them, they wanted to use the old people. And on the right of them, they also wanted to use the old people, the old bureaucrats, some of them, the most important ones. So it was a melange. It was not a revolution in the French sense, or the October Revolution in Russia, which were also very brutal. With the Nazis, it happened that the Americans, the French and the English, the occupiers, could force it on them. But the Germans themselves, and Adenauer, who was not a Nazi at all, the first chancellor, very successful chancellor, consciously used people who he knew that they were Nazis, because he needed the support of these people. And he created a democracy, and we see Germany today, it's a very democratic country, maybe the most democratic country in Europe. But it was built in the first years, it was the first 10, 15 years, it was built on many Nazis consciousness, in Nazi consciousness, and it was a very slow process. Nuremberg process was over, and a lot of real true Nazi judges who convicted people to death were adopted in the system. So why wouldn't it happen in Hungary? It did happen in Hungary as well, and it happens even today. We know the people who were in the secret police of the carte regime, and now they are still giving advice, etc., part of the system today. So it couldn't happen, and it didn't happen. And what you started with our conversation with, I would be very happy if all would have been published without thinking, opening. But they said, oh yeah, the communists said, the socialists said, oh, but there are secrets, important state secrets, and a lot of people would be harmed, etc. Bullshit. We know it would have been possible. I'm 100% sure. And it's also the so-called Velvet Revolution in Prague. Nobody was killed. Nobody was. It
was negotiated.
It was negotiated behind, the people, and it was not fought over. So, well, this is how it happened. We can't change this. It's 30 years.
Yes, of course.
And we see the result in Hungary, especially. We see, because the Orban regime is based on this. He consciously, when he lost the election, Orban lost the election in 6. Twice. He lost the election twice, in 2002 and 2006. And in 2006, according to sources, he told his people, the small circle, Kadar has won. That means that he has to become Kadar. Not that Gyurcsány is Kadar, but he has to create a Kadar-like system, because Hungary is a Kadar-like society. And it may have been not a stupid idea for a person who wanted power and money and I don't want to speak
even
about.
If he was an anti-communist at first.
Yes, but then he said Kadar has won, and if you observe him today, he's repeating the gestures of Kadar. Kadar had this squinting. He was telling something, and he said, yeah. He was talking with his people, and he's doing the same shit, this guy. Absolutely. Even his face has become like Kadar's. So you can't do it unpunished, you know, in this way. But yes, the history is slower than we think. I had a discussion with my nephew now, who took me to Timișoara to make this exhibition.
Yes.
And I did it. I did the selection of the photos and the arrangement. And I told him, but we live much better than I live much better than I lived 40 years ago. You live better than we lived. So history is also progressing. Yes. It's progressing. We know that. The way we can converse now without. Do you have to think twice about what you ask from me? No. Do I think twice about my answers? No. We can talk as free persons. Even if the systems in both of our countries are problematic compared to an ideal liberal democracy. But still, personally, individually, history is going in a certain way. Okay, writing this book was also trying to help this process of if I am ready to, as a Jew, as a child of communists, as a child of secret agents, as a writer, I can stand there and have no problem with telling it. It helps a lot of people. So you can talk about it. I've
made an interview with David Grossman, and he told me that he feels that literature gives the second chance to people. In a way, you gave your mother a second chance by telling.
Very beautiful, very beautiful, very nice, very nice. Now, I just want to say that this is also pedagogical, and back to your question of catharsis. It means if I stand there and I tell my truth, and any journalist can come to me, and I decided anybody comes, I will answer him, because every time you go through the same process, it's not routine, because it's so complicated. You cannot be a routinier in this subject, because I have to rethink it all the time. And you know, when Esterházy published his book in 2002,
Harmonia Celestis,
and the other one, the corrected edition, I don't know how is it in Romanian. He said he never gave any interviews because, and I understand him, he was a different position. He was a well-known writer. He wrote a big book and a small book, which was in conflict with the Harmonia Celestis, and he didn't want to say anything else about it because it's very difficult to represent it. But I decided, even if it's not easy all the time, that I will represent it as a person, as I am here now, because then the truth of the book is again and again justified.
You know, your mother's role in communist regime isn't the only theme of the book. Your mother did not feel at home in Israel. She didn't feel at home in Hungary either. As her mother, and I learned this from another book, Zehuze, her mother, she did not feel really at home in Israel too. What are the consequences of this permanent state of alienation for a person?
Again, a very, very good question. It's a very important part of the book.
Yes.
That not simply to explain how she could be pushed into this role, but also her full tragical situation. Yes, my grandmother but my grandmother, the problem with their relationship, my grandparents, my grandfather and my mother, is very complicated because they pushed her out from Israel, from Palestine first and Israel. They said, it doesn't have any sense for you to stay here. And maybe she also wanted to go, but she was young. And in her first letters from Hungary, in 47, she said, I want to go back. I want to go back. And my grandparents, no, stay where you are. No, it's much better. Don't come back. There was no Israel yet. Israel was in 48.
Yes, in 48. Yeah.
1 year later or half a year later. And they didn't want her to go back because they thought it would be better for her. But they didn't think about the physical cultural pain she felt.
Yeah.
Okay, she was a communist. She said she's building communism, but she didn't feel it. But the air was not good. The fruits were not the same. The smell was not the same. The language, which she never learned. And my grandmother went out to Palestine in 1921. So they lived already 20 years in Palestine.
Yeah.
And in a way, although they were opposing the politics of Israel, the Zionism, my grandparents, she still felt that she doesn't want to change a home again. She arrived in a way. And she, in one of her letters, which I found only now because I'm working on a re-edition of Zeuze, which will have a different title and it will be a different book, but with a lot of aspects that are the same. Because of this story, I had to rethink it. My publisher wanted to publish it 3 years ago, and I said, no, I have to read everything there. Because when I wrote it, I didn't know about this. And a lot of other things. And I'm reading all the letters of my grandparents again. It's a big work, but I enjoy it in a way that I can look at the story again. And she says, once to my mother, she writes, don't speak bad about the Israelis. Because they are also people who want to be happy. They are also, because my mother in Hungary, they were both anti-Zionistic, so anti-nationalist. My grandparents, but my mother in Hungary was distanced from the Israelis. She couldn't travel until 65. So for almost 20 years, they didn't allow her to travel to Israel from Hungary. And she alienated herself from the Israeli people. And my grandparents, who were absolutely not in favor of this nationalistic kind of thinking, they said, please understand that they are also human beings with desires, wishes, etc. That means for me that they were more at home in Israel than my mother in Hungary. She was really a wandering Jew, the wandering Jew.
Yes.
Mythological figure. Ahasverus, but as a woman, a wandering Jewess, you know.
Yes.
My father's case is different, but her case was this. And, you know, because she was really a wonderful personality, she could absorb a lot of negativity and turn it into positivity, but not everything. So slowly she died with 63, which means she was young. With today's measures, 63 is young. And I remember her last 10 years or something when she jumped into cancer. You know, that's a kind of, I want to finish this. I can't go on because of the terrible, difficult situation with my father, let's say. And that and already she couldn't have gone back because everything has changed in Israel in the 80s already, 30 years, 40 years. She forgot Hebrew as her mother tongue, etc. So her situation was doubly tragic.
Yes.
And it's true that it's one subject of the book, and especially in the last chapter, this Wander the Jew, this migrant status, which is very strong part of, and it will remain with humanity in the next 1,000 years, I think, because of the climate change. And we know that climate change is a very important part of the people's wandering from Africa, from not only the wars. So it will remain this situation of very, very tragical, rootless people just wandering around and having in some countries, they found the enemies there, in France, in the United States, in England, against these people who are trying to just survive. I know it's a difficult problem and it's connected with many political issues. But yes, my mother was a pioneer in this too. But then, of course, a lot of Jews went to Palestine in the 20s and went back in the 30s, also in my family. So they were moving there and
Yes.
back because it was not an easy place to live there. But my
Mhm.
mother was born there. So that this kind of going back and forth is very typical for Jews. I mean, this is when I wrote Zeuse in 2004-5. I met people who said that they have also these letters from people from broken up families. One part came back and they write to them from Israel. So it's a very typical, much more typical situation than what we think. I didn't know about it.
We didn't learn too much about your father's life story. There are mostly things we can read between the lines, let's say it. He was also an instrument of the regime as well, like so many others in that era. He has become schizophrenic. Do you see a link between his illness and his relationship with the regime? Was there a trauma, not a moral one, but about his identity? He also decided to change his name twice.
I'm sure that the last phase of his illness was this there's the word üldözési mania. Just a minute, I don't find it even in English. Just a minute. Which was one part of the just a minute. No. Yeah. But the beginning, the problem, the beginning was with the Holocaust. So that he lost all his family. From only 4 or 5 members survived from a big, huge family. 50, 60 people were murdered, and the mother was murdered, who was a.
So, like his life began with a big trauma.
Yeah, exactly. And that he was alone. So when he met my mother, he was persecution mania. That he feels that everybody's following him and everybody
like paranoia.
Paranoia, yes. So he was thinking that somebody, that the next house is filming him. That's, I'm certain that is connected with his secret agent's work, because he knew how many people were observing other people. That's true, but the biggest part of his falling apart, which was in 3 phases, by the way, in 50s, first in 53, then in 63, and then in 73. So every 10 years there was it's called in the psychology, it's called Schub. Schub means pushing in German. So one push, kind of coming back. Second push, it's always physical problem. And the third push destroyed him in the early 70s. This is when my mother was drawn into the secret service. But I think that the most important part was that he became a lonely guy in Palestine, where he didn't want to stay. He went there during the war because to save himself, and their relationship, my parents' relationship, was so that my mother had another love, an English soldier. Not my father, but okay, my father was a nice chap, very clever, very communist, very whatever, good comrade. So they kind of clutched each other. And because my father didn't have a family, my mother had a big family and a big background, but my father didn't. So the clutch became like close, when you cannot that's cancer itself already, when the other person is the only hope for you to survive. And he was not once he wanted to kill himself, and because of love problems, not because of schizophrenics. Schizophrenia was a diagnosis in the end, paranoid schizophrenia, which is very, very discussed in, I don't know much about it, but it's a discussed subject. It's very complicated because we know that a lot of schizophrenics can be very creative and survive a long time, etc. But the problem was that my mother went to Hungary where she was isolated. My father went to Palestine and back to Hungary where he was isolated. And two isolated persons, people just clutched into each other, where there was, okay, we had 4 children. We are the children of my parents, all 4 of us. The sex was okay, but the love, the emotional part was somewhere else. For my mother, not for my father, who said she's Ingrid Bergman. My mother is Ingrid Bergman. That was his idea of my mother. And you know, there is a beautiful photo of them, the marriage picture. Let's see if I can send you.
Maybe
it's there. Yeah, it's the cover. It's even the cover. Yeah, you see them.
Here.
That's the marriage photo, but the original one is very beautiful black and white photo. And they were a nice couple, but still it was not a healthy construction. So yes, that the paranoid part is sure enforced by his agent's work. We don't know which part was stronger, but in the end, it all fell apart. It all fell down. But he was very, very weak. And I just found a letter now, and this is also for me even a little bit tragical. In 47, so the year when they went from Palestine to Hungary, and Israel was not yet existing. And my father writes to my aunt, the sister of my mother, when for the 3rd time they broke up in Budapest, my parents, 3 times, because it didn't function well. Even in Palestine, they broke up twice. So a marriage for 1 year, and they broke up 5, 6 times already. And then my father writes to my aunt. I found this letter only now. I don't remember ever. My only solution, dear Nama, is that I make a child. So if there is a child, she cannot get rid of me. So his only trick was to get in the bed of my mother in the best time to make a child.
Because he was afraid.
Yeah, but rightly, because my mother was a very strong person, and if she didn't want something, she told it. But when she had the child, my sister, that was the end of the story, because then you are a parent, and in the 40s and 50s, you didn't just divorce like today, you know, or you had to marry, and today you can be single and have children with a woman. So that was technically, making a family was just a technical way of keeping my mother.
He had a plan.
Yeah, he had a plan. And he knew, and he was right. But then I'm not against being born because I'm the 3rd, so they practice this thing which is in marriage. Okay, it's all right. I'm happy to be alive. But still, I mean, it's not healthy to create a situation in which the other one will never be free of you, because you know that if she has a child.
Yes.
This is only, I discovered it only now, but this shows that, it shows how complicated his psyche was already.
Yeah. You know, in Romania, in Hungary as well, I realized reading your book, these agents working for the regime were in most cases the agent who are talking with your mother, for example. In most cases were mediocre. You wrote a play about Vitellius, a despotic emperor, a real tyrant, but a mediocre one. How did all those mediocre dictators manage to keep so many countries, you know, captive for so many years?
Yeah, well, first of all, we had the Soviet Union as a military, again, a very, very good question. I will answer it differently, not in this big picture, but the small picture, these mediocre agents. It's incredible. I read not only acts of my mother, but also some other dossiers of other people. And the thing is that this profession, to be an officer who is working with an agent, is in a way very simple. You think that they are good psychologists. No. You must do 10 things. You must say about 6 things, and it works.
Yeah.
And I read, because the systematical thing is working. I read one of my best friends who was a film director and killed himself in '85, Gabor Bodis, his name is mentioned in my book. He was, in the 70s, he was organized as an agent. And he signed the paper. I don't know how they made him. The next day, he asked for a meeting, it's in the dossier, to tell that he doesn't want to do this. And he was the cleverest guy I knew in the world, the brilliantest, really, a great artist. And I read this meeting with the officers the next day. 2 officers in an apartment, a private apartment, and my friend. I didn't know then, of course, but only after his death, a long time. And they eat him with a little spoon, you know, because they have the method, which is very primitive, but it works. You know, like, and it's the same with the big dictators. If the system of fear and blackmail is in place, the universal system of if you do the favor for me, you will be okay. So no real rules, open rules are. If there is this military might, because there was also the Soviet Union there, let's not forget the military might of the Soviet Union. It's not so difficult. It's not difficult. The problem is that these economies don't work. The great economist János Kornai died just now, the Hungarian economist who was 93. He wrote a book, the famous book, about why the socialist economies cannot function, because you cannot buy anything. How this not being able to buy anything. He was the first theoretician of this. I don't know, deficiency. I don't know what's the title in English. It's not important. This was the only enemy, not the people's minds, that the economy will fall apart. And it did. Because this kind of centralized thing that cannot go on endlessly. It seems now. I don't want to give lectures about economics because I'm not an economist, but otherwise they had all the means, very simple means to hold to the power. And because of it's very centralized. So it's a different question from these mediocre officers who are very stupid, or they think sometimes they think they are very brilliant, but they are just using the handbook of Soviet and the British Secret Service. They took concepts from the Brits. That was the base, the MA5. I don't know how they called it, and they took and the whole system from the Soviets. That was adapted, and it's very efficient. No, let's say very efficient means 90% efficient. There are always people who can resist it. They are either killed or just put aside, or they survive to tell their story. Otherwise, it functions very well.
Yes,
it's very sad, but it's true. But it happens everywhere where dictatorships develop. And you see that even, I mean, you see Mr. Trump, you know, such a stupid guy. But he's stupid. He's clever in a way, but spiritually he's very stupid. He's clever in a way how world functions, how you can cheat yourself through everything, and it works because the powers behind him know how to
speculate all these emotions
and use him, and they use him very well. That means that stupidity in itself is not something that will keep you off from power.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can be very stupid and a very powerful figure. It happens. It happens. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. It's my last questions. Even if the current politics affairs are not the main topic of our interview, I don't think we can avoid them completely in the context of our conversation so far. Poland, Hungary are described today as a liberal democracies. Romania has not been brilliant in terms of democracy, rule of law in recent years. How did we get here? We are talking about countries that have lived a long time under dictatorship.
Exactly, and that's genetically in the blood of the system. That's a genetical thing. That cannot change so fast. So if we are not lucky, because the Slovakians are luckier in a way. Slovakia was a much more backward country. Always we look down on them, the Hungarians, the Slovaks, the peasants, whatever. Okay, we look down on Romanians too. We Hungarians, you know, the superior, whatever. And we were not lucky with our political class. So the Slovakians were luckier. The Czechs were luckier until Babiš came, but of course Babiš is representing the same, but it's a bit different.
Yeah, but now he lost the election.
Let's hope, because it's a very problematic situation. I don't want to be very concrete, but what I want to say is that yes, sure, just because it was not only 40 years after the war, it was 60 years. It was from 1948 or that there was a little revolution broken down, and this kind of system, this oligarchic feudalistic system, was dominant until 90. So how do we annihilate 100 years of feudalism? It's in the head. What's important that in France, for example, I give you an example. I always think about this. In France, after the 1848 revolution, who came there? Bonaparte. Napoleon III, who was a dictator, who killed people, etc. And at the same time, and it went until 71, so it's the 19th century. But he was the modernizer of France. The French hate him today, but he was a dictator who was at the same time created Paris, as we know it, and the economy as we know it, as we knew it later. So history is paradoxical. But it was 150 years ago or 170 years ago that it happened in France. It may happen now in Eastern Europe if we don't imitate. History doesn't imitate like this, but the influences are there. But it's a very long process, and Hungary was always from the Middle Ages, from this very feudalistic, very oligarchic way of thinking. And also Poland was never a free country, you know, and even if we see, because it was always occupied either by the Germans or the Russians or other power Swedes, we should be very careful when we see the elites who have an ideal of a society, partly copied from the Western pattern, you know, which we say it's good. I just told my nephew when we went to Timisoara, we had long discussions in the car. He took me there to be able to come back fast. And I told him, look at Dostoevsky. He's a great writer also because he hated this European. He said that the Russian Russians, and he was a great writer because of this. That means I don't like his anti-Semitism. I don't like his political thinking in a way, but as a novelist, he's one of the greatest novelists who ever lived. And his creativity was partly because of this conflict of the Eastern, the Russian model and the Western liberal model, which is sometimes very, very antipathic. And if okay, in Hungary now they use Brussels as an
enemy, the public enemy, the greatest.
As a word of how do you say? Sitokso, just a minute. I spoke so much, but I will tell you now because I want the exact word. Sitokso. Sphere word. Fuck you, something. Brussels. Yes, Brussels is sometimes boring, bureaucratic, slow, problematic. of course, I support Brussels very much, but that doesn't mean that you must be uncritical about it.
Yes, of course.
And in Hungary, or in this Eastern Romania, Poland, and now Slovenia, whatever, Serbia, you know, there are countries where it's hundreds and hundreds of years of historical way of living. And yes, we intellectuals, we clever guys, look at Paris or look at Berlin and look at London. What happened now in London with the Brexit? So it's much more complicated. London is still a wonderful place, and England is still a wonderful place, but the thing is much more complicated than our idealistic way of thinking. Why can't we do it with the push of the button? That this system, which is so good for us, it's good for 20,000 people, but the other 10 million doesn't think about it. They think about money, they think about tomorrow, they think about their jobs. It takes a lot of time. The French people today hate Bonaparte, the third Napoleon.
Yeah, but it took many years.
Yeah, they hate him. He lost the war against the Germans, etc. But he was the modernizer of France. The liberalizer of France, big A. Sorry, just trying to show you the paradox.
You know, this is last question. The pandemic crisis has revealed and aggravated the deepest fears and anxieties of the people. Was it an advantage or not for authoritarian leaders like Viktor Orban, for example?
It was a short term, absolutely an advantage, especially for him who put soldiers in the hospitals, show that now they don't have soldiers and the hospitals still function. Very interesting. He didn't allow journalists in the hospitals. He made a state secret of what happens in the hospital. Nobody knows what happens in the hospitals. So he knows that he has to stop news. He has to stop openness to be able to push his own narrative. And yes, he profited from it. But now he's not because of the pandemic, but it's part of it because people are fed up with lies. A lot of people, not all of them, fed up with this not knowing what's going on. Now he's in a little bit weaker position, even if the pandemic did help him in many ways, because he created many laws which only helped his power, just saying because of the pandemic. Yes, but history is also like the ebb and flow, you know, of the sea, you know. Yes, he came also because the other side, the so-called other side, our side, the left, the liberals, the whatevers, were becoming too heterogeneous and were too complacent. That's the word. So they thought, I have the truth. So, but in the field, and this is why maybe this middle right figure was chosen for the opposition. A lot of people don't know why I voted also for him, to tell the truth, because I didn't want a leftist person now. I'm not a rightist. I'm not so leftist as I was. I was a Maoist even, you know, when I was 20 years old. So I was so left as you can be. But because we need a kind of middle in the country, which is missing, the middle where you can meet with people who have different ideas and you can have a conversation with them. The house where I sit in, this is a small place where I work. This is a so-called summer kitchen. It's a peasant house. I have a beautiful garden here, and we rent the house since 3 years. I just tell you. And the owner of the house was an absolute convinced believer in Orban. And the nicest man on earth at the same time. Yeah. It happens. Yeah. So we avoided to talk about politics. He was he died now. He died a few months ago during the pandemic, not because of that, but he was a living example of how very nice people, just for other reasons, become infatuated with the leader. But you can still have you can still have normal human. Now, I want more of these conversations with people I meet on the street, and he says,
let's agree to disagree.
Yeah, I'm a Christian conservative. And I say, okay, let's talk about anything, which you could do in Germany or in France. Italy is different, because in Italy, I have many friends in Italy. And when I was there 10 years ago, and the fans of Berlusconi, you know, but this shows also that this is a world phenomenon, and this is a historical phenomenon. So I'm sad about that Orban is in this position in Hungary, or Bolsonaro in Brazil. Okay, but you see that it's a world trend everywhere, because the world is changing, and this is a moment of transformation. And in a moment of transformation and crisis, all these people come out who is using the weaknesses of the beliefs of the people. I need a Hungary where I can converse with people who think different politically. I would be very glad to have a Hungary like this.
Not polarized.
Not so polarized, but everywhere it is polarized. It's not a Hungarian. In France, it is polarized. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I hope we'll see you
for your wonderful questions. And sorry, you are in Timișoara. You will be there.
I'll be the host actually of the evening with you and.
Wonderful! But I will go on the first day, so I will be there all the 3 days.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So we can maybe meet if you have time.
Yeah, I hope it will be all fine with this pandemic.
Yeah, let's hope. I know that situation is not easy, but I was there, and the town is functioning. So
yeah, of course. Thank you.
I didn't understand how this works, but thank you for the wonderful questions.
And see you in Timișoara.
See you in
Have a
Timișoara.
nice day. Thank you.
Bye.